session. It is our inaugural session of the East European Film Festival. Before this, we have had a short film festival, an Iranian film festival, French film festival, and a Kannada film festival. The East European Film Festival has been curated by Dr. Irina Livzeanu. She will also lead the discussion on all Saturdays of this month. Irina is Associate Professor Emeritus at the University of Pittsburgh. Born in Romania, she immigrated to the United States as a child. She has a PhD in Eastern European history from the University of Michigan. She has taught Russian, Soviet, European, Eastern European, and Jewish history at Colby College, the Ohio State University, and the University of Pittsburgh. She has frequently used film in her teaching, and she developed the course Eastern European Communism at the Movies that was cross-listed between film studies and history. Her writing has focused on the cultural, social, and political history of Romania during the 20th century. Talking Films Online extends a warm welcome to you, Irina. We are very happy to have you in our midst, and we look forward to the session. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, excellent. So I want to thank you for inviting me to this group, and I want to thank Nipa Majumdar, who is not with us right now, but she was the one that introduced me to this group. And so she's a dear colleague and friend. And of course, I want to thank Gita and Nihila in particular, because you were so helpful in organizing this and even in prodding me a bit when I was distracted in the worst way in the last month over the Ukraine situation. And I needed this to help me focus away from those tragic events. So thank you for reminding me that there was something good in the offing, aside from a return of tragic history to Eastern Europe. To remind you, even though you have already said it, I am not primarily a film person, but I love film and I have used film a lot in my work, even though I'm primarily a historian. So I look forward to hearing all of the insights of the people in this distinguished audience of film scholars and connoisseurs. My specialty is Eastern and Central Europe and political and cultural history of the 20th century mostly, but of course, running into the 21st century, which we are all experts on our own times. So film is certainly part of that history, as well as representing that history. Often it's certainly one way to depict it and to represent that history. And I think for many, many people, it may be the primary way in which they get to know history at some level, perhaps reading less and watching more in this very visual age that we are living in. So the films that I chose for us to see in the coming month are all self-reflexive. They all deal with and dwell on filmmakers using film to reflect on how film and performance can be used honestly or not, how film and performance can be manipulative. Initially, in the course that Gita mentioned, that I taught, communism, Eastern European communism at the movies, my interest was to teach students about how filmmakers could deal with censorship, which was pretty strong, pretty in your face, let's say, in Eastern European countries. And yet somehow some filmmakers managed to get around that and show and make movies and even show them, even sometimes briefly, or show them briefly, and then they would be taken off the market for 10 years, and then they would come back after 10 years. But how they kind of got around it, and in some countries more than others, and I think Poland was a good example of a place where Polish filmmakers really did amazing things with being able to get around censorship. But the Czechs had their amazing new wave. Romanians on occasion managed to slip something through, and we're going to see Pintilie film at the very end, if we can get a copy of it. And I know Gita is working on that. So that was my initial interest in that type of self-reflexive topic in films that came out of Eastern Europe. But issues of censorship and manipulation of film and manipulation of performance and the attempt to impose control on directors, filmmakers, actors, and artists in general is not limited to communist regimes. And in Eastern Europe, in the post-communist period, there are continuities. And so the first film that we watched, Barbarians, to use the short title of the movie we all watched for today, we're dealing with the current period, and so it's not a matter of communism. It's a matter of a wider public believing certain things that were partly a result of the ignorance that the communist period policies were the ignorance was a result of those policies. But I will get to that in a bit. Now, one last sort of introductory thing is that as a historian, I tend to like to go chronologically. So my idea was that we would see Lucian Pintilia's film, the reenactment first, because it was made in 1968, and then we would see Man of Marble 1977 and Camera Buff 1979. And then last of all, I do not care if we go down in history as Barbarians 2018. But I want to thank Gita for being a true film person and doing away with my humdrum chronological way of thinking. I actually like very much starting with the Radu Jude film, which starts really in the present and gets us to think about both the present and the history of World War II and the Holocaust and the communist period and the legacies of that communist period. And so thank you for that intervention. Now, about Radu Jude, I became familiar with Radu Jude as one of several young film directors of the new wave in somewhere in the 2000s, probably 2005, 6, 7, I don't remember exactly when. He was born in 1977, so like 10 years after the first film that we're going to see in this series of 4 films. And he studied law before he studied film. And he's very much of an intellectual filmmaker and there are long sequences of talkiness. He reminds me in some ways of Godard in that sense. And I sometimes really like that, if you know the people he's citing and the passages that his actors and characters are going on about. Sometimes they can seem a little much, especially if you're thinking, oh my God, how are my students going to react to those? And I'm curious what you think about that as well. But he's very philosophical, and that's a quality, or maybe a bad quality, I don't know. And of course, I think some of us, who are in the Eastern European field, we all kind of became aware of all of these films by young directors in the 2000s. I myself curated a film festival at the University of Pittsburgh in 2007, which I called Romanian Cinema on the Edge. And let me see if I have, no, I don't have easily something to show you from that, but I can make that available if there's some way later. And it was really a great success. This was right after 4 months, 3 weeks and 2 days by another young director, Cristian Mungiu, came out, and that had gotten the grand prize at Cannes. And so Romanian cinema really became well known at that point. And then in 2010, a wonderful graduate student in the history of art department here at the University of Pittsburgh wanted to do another Romanian film festival. And so I advised her. I didn't want to do it again because it was so much work, but she did all of the work, and I advised, and she titled the festival "To Act or Not to Act: Ethics in Romanian Cinema." And her name is Cristina Albu, and she is now Dr. Cristina Albu, an associate professor of art history. But I became truly fascinated with Radu Jude a few years ago when I saw several films by him made about historical and current topics that challenge the Romanian public in fundamental ways. Really about ethics, but about historical memory. And I also began to think of Jude as a historian of sorts. So like I'm a sort of film scholar of sorts. He, a filmmaker, is, I think, a historian of sorts. And the films that made me think of him that way are Aferim, which he made in 2015. Aferim is a word in the Romani language, which roughly translates as bravo. And it's a film about Roma slavery in 19th century Wallachia, which was one of the principalities that came together to make up modern Romania. And this aspect of Romanian slavery is hardly taught in schools. And prejudice against the Roma and persecution of the Roma is rampant in Romania today and in other parts of Eastern Europe. And so this was a remarkable film. Then that was 2015. 2017, Jude made another film entitled The Dead Nation, Fragments of Parallel Lives. And this film has been called a documentary intervention in public memory of the Holocaust in Romania. And it's a documentary, very interesting. And I'll say a little bit more about it in a moment. And then he made in 2018 the Barbarians film that you all watched. I do not care if we go down in history as Barbarians, which I think can be considered a kind of follow-up to The Dead Nation. And then in 2021, The Exit of the Trains, another documentary about a pogrom in the city of Iași in 1941 in Romania during World War II. And all of these films, there were serious historical consultants working with Jude, and The Exit of the Trains, the historian working with Jude on all of the films dealing with World War II and the Holocaust, was actually co-director. And I haven't seen that film yet, so I don't want to say anything about it, except that it deals with that same period. And something that's very interesting about Jude is that he's very interested in primary sources, which is what historians base their work on, right? In order to write a history of anything, you need not just what other historians have written about any particular episode in history, but you need original sources, whether they are official documents, governmental documents, or photographs, or statistical documents, or folklore. You need primary documents, not something that has been already processed by somebody else. And so in Aferim, the film about Roma slavery in Romania, Jude is using a lot of quotations from 19th century sources in the dialogue of characters in the film. In The Dead Nation, Fragments of Parallel Lives, there are 3 sets of primary sources. One of them is the diary of a Jewish doctor and literary person in Bucharest who noted down what was going on during the war. And these diary excerpts are read by Radu Jude himself. Second set of sources are photographs of a Romanian photographer named Costica Axinte. The photo archive is from his Photo Splendid studio in the provincial town of Slobozia. And so a lot of these still photographs are counterposed with the reading that Radu Jude is doing from the diary of the Jewish doctor. And the third set of archival sources are sound readings of political speeches, newscasts, and patriotic songs from the National Film Archives, which are really hard to get access to. And the National Radio Archives are totally inaccessible. But these 3 sets of sources make up this documentary, and it's a totally fascinating documentary film, not a talking heads kind of documentary, but it gives you a sense of the Romanian population in this provincial southern Romanian town with a lot of soldiers' pictures, but not only. During the late 30s, during the war, and immediately after the war, this Jewish man's perspective, who is thinking, when is going to be my turn to be deported, or who knows what. And then these political speeches about how great the victory of Hitler and the Axis will be. So that is what I think is the prequel to the film that we all watched, Barbarians. So I had not yet seen Barbarians when I was in Bucharest last time in 2018, but Radu Jude had just finished Barbarians, and he was off to go to Carlo Vivari to accept the grand prize at that festival. And I met him at the History Center of Romanian Jewry in Bucharest, where he showed excerpts of Barbarians. And then, having seen the excerpts, I couldn't wait to see the whole thing. And of course, I've seen it now several times, and I've taught it, and I love this film. I could give you a brief history if you need me to, but
yeah, please go ahead, Irina.
Should I?
Yeah,
Should I?
yes.
Okay. All right. So to give you a brief history, like many countries all over Europe, there is a history of anti-Semitism in Romania going back to the 19th century. Romania came together as a country first with the unification of two principalities, Wallachia and Moldavia, in 1856. And then after World War I, in 1918, the country doubled in territory and in population by adding additional territories of Transylvania, Bukovina, and Bessarabia. And with the addition of these many territories in 1918, the country came to be known as Greater Romania. And it was a moment of national glory for Romanian nationalists and for most Romanian ethnics of the country. But together with these territories came into this larger country a lot of minority populations, non-Romanian speakers, Germans, Hungarians, Russians, Ukrainians, and Jews. And so this, in the what we call the interwar period, the period between World War I and World War II, was one in which Romanians both exalted in the unification and the greatness of the country, as well as experienced frustration at the fact that there were lots of non-Romanians who, according to the Romanian nationalists, didn't really belong there, although they had lived on those territories forever. So it was a tense couple of decades, and a fascist movement developed, and alongside the fascist movement, there were different levels of nationalist groups that were not truly fascist, but there were some, there was a level of nationalist consensus that the elites should all become Romanian, and more Romanians should attend universities so that the university educated elites should be able to ascend to middle class positions, and it would be good to get rid of all the Jews in various sectors, and that sort of thing. And then as Nazism and fascism took over other parts of Europe, this domestic extreme nationalism and fascism was strengthened, of course. And Romania then also experienced some national tragedies because some of these newly gained territories were taken away through the Axis arbitrations that took place in 1940. So Romania lost parts of these territories and figured that if they joined the Axis, that is Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan, they could, in that alliance, regain territories. And they would, Romania had a border with the Soviet Union, and by joining that alliance, they could then regain territories lost to the Soviet Union. So the leader of Romania came to be Ion Antonescu, and he was a general, and his second in command, the vice president of the country, was Mihai Antonescu, which is very confusing. And a lot of the articles that I've read about the film confuse the two. So the title of the movie, I do not care if we go down in history as Barbarians, it comes from Mihai Antonescu, who was who made a speech in which he advocated for using this moment to purify the population of Romania. Now, Ion Antonescu was certainly advocating that as well, but that particular speech came from Mihai Antonescu, and it's depicted in the film, of course. And then the sort of the thing you have to understand about Antonescu is that he was a right-wing nationalist for sure. He was briefly allied with the Iron Guard, which was the Romanian fascist party. But then he repressed the Iron Guard because they were more radical than he was. And but his ideology and his plan was pretty much the same. And so ethnic cleansing was what they wanted to do and what he proceeded to do. And this ethnic cleansing was mainly directed at the Jews and the Roma. So you've got this 19th century history being played out in the 20th century by very radical means. And most people think of the Holocaust as the deportation of Jews and Roma to camps in Poland or Theresienstadt in Bohemia, or German camps, or so on. But Antonescu, as an ally of the Axis, got to expand Romania into a part of Ukraine called Transnistria. And there were camps set up by the Romanians, administered by the Romanians themselves. And that's where Jews from certain parts of Romania and the Roma were mainly deported. They were not deported to Poland. And by 1942, fall of 1942, when it looked like the Germans were getting stuck and were not able to move past Stalingrad. You know, they were stuck at Stalingrad, and then they were pushed back by the Soviets. Antonescu thought, you know, the Germans want me to send Jews to these camps in Poland. And, you know, I may not want to do that, because what if they don't win the war? I want to have a pretty good negotiating position with the Allies, if it so happens that the Allies win. So Romania kind of hedged its bets, not out of philo-Semitism or out of being humanitarian, but a kind of political calculus. And so they never sent the Jews of southern Romania, of Old Kingdom Romania, to these camps in Poland, which is what the Nazis wanted them to do. And then by 1944, the Soviets were pushing the Germans back towards the west, chasing them to Berlin, and they got Transnistria back, they got Ukraine back, and the Romanians were defeated, and so they changed sides. They became allies of the Soviets, and it wasn't. It was, they were defeated basically, and so they decided we have no choice. And so this is kind of important to understand the reactions in the movie of the audience to this pageantry that takes place in the middle of Bucharest in post-communist present day, right? Now, a little bit more on the post-communist period. Ion Antonescu, and all of these anti-communist leaders and anti-Soviet leaders were rehabilitated, you know, because in 1989, December 22, 1989, the communist dictator of Romania was toppled finally. And it was a moment of great joy, right? And there had been a great deal of ignorance during the communist period about what exactly happened in World War II, right? Because Romania was a Soviet satellite, and in general, the Soviets never taught the Holocaust as a Jewish and Roma tragedy. It was always the peace-loving people being crushed by imperialists and Nazis. And so for Romanians, you know, they took no responsibility for what happened in World War II. It was all the fault of the Nazis. And so that, I think, is important background information for understanding popular reactions depicted in this film to the reenactment that the theater director tries to perform in the middle of Bucharest. So there seems to be a lot more anti-Soviet reaction there than anti-Nazi reaction. I think there is enough of history. I feel like I've overwhelmed you with history, but I do want to make one more point about Radu Jude, whom I just really totally respect as not only a filmmaker, but as a kind of a citizen, and you know, since this group has also seen another movie made by Radu Jude that got a big prize at the Berlinale, the big, I should say, the big prize at the Berlinale last year. He has the most amazing female characters, main characters that I can think of, and I think both Maria, what is her name? The main character in this movie, and the main character, the teacher in Mariana, yes, thank you. And the teacher in the Bad Luck Banging are sort of kindred spirits to me. They are very principled, very strong women who are real people, but they also share something, especially Mariana, with Jude himself, you know. So I think of him, or maybe that's just something to throw out there to discuss, as somebody who's possibly a true feminist, and who tries to see things from the perspective of women who have a lot to struggle with in this society that is deeply sexist, in addition to being anti-Roma, anti-Jewish, and many other things. I think maybe I've spoken too long, certainly more than Gita had wanted me to.
No, that's okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Irina, for that historical overview, which is definitely needed for a film of this kind. And so thank you for that. It's now open for discussion. Would anyone like to come in at this point, say something about the film, or if you have a question or a comment on Irina's introduction, would you like to say something? Okay, while you gather your thoughts, let me just put forward something that had struck me about the film. Irina, you ended your discussion with your introduction with the question of strong women in Jude's film. And in fact, that was one of the first things that I thought about after watching this film. The fact that he chose a woman to, you know, to be the director of the reenactment, I thought was a very interesting move on his part. And especially because the whole reenactment is so militaristic. You know, look at the mise en scène. It's, you know, guns and uniforms and brass bands and processions and the tanks and all of that. And in the middle of all this, you have, this very petite woman
Yes.
who is, who is directing this show. And in the midst of so much opposition to, her viewpoint, mainly coming from the city hall representative.
Right.
And she takes him on so well, in every debate that he tries to enter into with her. And, so I thought that was something very interesting. And without essentializing the notion of, womanhood as, as pacifists and as somebody who is more sensitive to the human condition. I thought the woman was, presenting both in the space of that reenactment, as well as to the audience, an alternative vision of the world, So, that is what she seems to stand for. So that I thought was something interesting about the film.
Yes. Yes. And she did have an ally, a male ally, who was the producer, I think, or cinematographer. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, the one who acted as the general, right? And he was the one who said, while rehearsing, we won't do it, but
right.
in final, we will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, it showed you that there were good men too. It wasn't just, you didn't have to be a woman to be like this, but most of the men were dubious. And especially her partner.
Yes. But there was not much about the Romas, right? Although there are references.
No, there were. I thought, I mean, it was what you had about the Roma was that there were, she wanted to involve the general non-professional actors in the reenactment, right? So she had some of these people who said, we don't want to be acting next to the Roma. And she said, but why not? They were also, we are reenacting this massacre in Transnistria, and the Roma were also deported. And then you get this bogus argument from the guy who said, please, segregate the Roma from us, who says, oh, my best friend is a gypsy, or whatever. It's stereotypical stuff. So you have, she's showing, Jude is showing you that the remnants of that stuff is still with us.
Anyone else? Yes, Monish, please come in. Yes, Monish, please come.
Professor, you talked about Jude making some documentaries.
Yes.
Listen, I find like this film and definitely the first section of Bad Luck. There's a quasi-documentary style in the way the film is made itself. And that, I think, is also a characteristic of certain other Romanian New Wave filmmakers. I mean, the way they move the camera, it's very non-interfertive, certain at point jerky. And, I don't know whether this film was shot maybe on video or maybe not properly on 35mm. The footage color points at certain things don't really look like a 35mm or a modern, very high-grade video. That's the point. But I think this quasi-documentary style is very interesting in Romania, and also this long take very long takes you have, the camera moving, following a character and all, which perhaps is again, is this a kind of trying to engage with reality and representing things more realistically in certain way, in the sense of, bazaar and all this whole theory of reality being associated with long takes. That's my first point to you. And secondly, I find this film, and also this film particularly in a way very depressing, in the sense it in a way portrays the futility of debating or reenacting a certain very dark historical period uh, at a point when the audience or the people in general, or the large section of the people in general, are not really willing to engage with that history, or perhaps they don't want to hear this history. Like in this film when it's end, it's very disturbing that the people start clapping when the Jew hatred speech happens. And in the end, I mean, she finds kind of refuge in Chekhov, being a Chekhov, and he's gifted a book again on the massacres by this Movila character. So I find it very depressing, and a lot of parallels to what is happening in India today. Like, I mean, the whataboutery about, whenever you raise a massacre, he'll raise another massacre, and
Yes.
that, and what is the number of massacres. And I think this entire right-wing nationalism, which is making a comeback, is based on whataboutery, and that's what he brilliantly captures in this film. And I think for Rude and some other, I'd seen another particular interesting Romanian film, 1208, East of Bucharest.
Yes, yes.
Again, the last part is again very quasi-documentary. It's like camera jerking, this thing not working, and all this thing. And again, this engagement of trying to go back to history, resulting in a kind of futile effort. I mean, in both in 1208, in this one also, the audience, I mean, it's stunning. The audience are clapping, and it kind of quote unquote as a happy ending. And for the director point of view, it's a complete disaster. What happens, what she tries to portray, and what her ideology is, and what she's trying to debate, it just falls flat. It's so depressing. It's very depressing.
Well, yes, I have to agree with you. It's depressing. I mean, it's certainly depressing for her. On the one hand, the victory is that she was able to do the show as she wished it, right? She did not let the censorship win that battle. But what was depressing is the audience reaction. The audience reaction was clapping at the Nazis and jeering at the Soviets. And they're basically reacting to their own communist repression. They're not really reacting to the historical show that she was trying to mount to educate them, right? So she hasn't succeeded in the educational project. Is that how you see it, Monish?
Yeah, it's and in a way, that is the most depressing part of it. Like,
yes.
And sort of what I feel, it becomes a very futile effort on her. She's putting in so much passion, so much energy and all, but the reaction of the audience with whom she's trying to communicate something new, something novel, something disturbing, she wants to create a debate. There's almost no debate. All the debate she has is with Movila. It's a fantastic. I think there are quotations from Wittgenstein, and I would find out Marx, a lot of other Romanian sources, which I think, it's again exemplified in the second sequence of Bad Luck.
Right.
Essays and all. It just
exactly
context essays, and that's all the entire film is, trying to probe into the Romanian psyche of jingoism, of racism.
Yes.
And that's how all these threats still continue and so deeply embedded. Anti-Sovietism.
Yes.
And all. And it's got also memories which linger also.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, it is depressing and it is difficult. I think I don't think this is easy, and I think that Radu Jude is portraying how difficult it is. I've been reading that with the previous film, the documentary, The Dead Nation, that he actually did a tour in 19 Romanian cities, and he went around to these 19 cities and little art theaters and did Q&As, because he sees this as an educational project as well, to have these discussions. It's not always easy. It's especially difficult. And so I think of this movie as a kind of sequel to that effort to do the documentary, because he's portraying how difficult it is, because he actually did that tour to try to speak with people, and he knows just how difficult it is. And one thing I should say is that Romania joined NATO in 2008, or I think, and the EU in 2004, something like that. And in order to join these organizations, it basically had to acknowledge its historical past, and there was a so-called Elie Wiesel commission about the Holocaust in Romania, and so there is now a kind of official acceptance of Romania as being part of the Nazis, and this horrible episode in Odessa where Romanians burned alive 19,000 Jews in these wooden cottages and so on. But to go from there to kind of a popular social acknowledgement of this is quite different. And there is the sense even that because the EU and NATO expected this to happen, that Romania wouldn't be able to join these organizations without having done that it was somehow imposed, and therefore it doesn't mean anything. I'm not sure if that helps.
Divya, please go. Oh, sorry, Monish, you want to continue?
Just another limited point I'd like to make. You're talking about the struggles of these East European filmmakers under communism with the censor board. So here also, I think there is still this struggle continues, as we see in this film, because Movila is kind of, in a way, acting as a censor agent. And overall, I find in Eastern European films, many Eastern European films, maybe in the Czech New Wave, in Romanian New Wave also, the filmmakers using very dark humor, very dark wit to subvert things. I mean, and perhaps that's where they're just, maybe that's also a way of escaping censors, maybe making it so witty and so, subtle, but very dark.
But that, Monish, that is part of the culture. My God, that goes back a long time. I think it has partly to do with Jewish humor, which is part of the cultures of all of these different places. And Jewish humor also has to do with oppression. It also has to do with the Czechs being part of the Habsburg Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then the Romanians part of the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So and I don't know, I mean, in India, there was the British Empire. I'm not sure if that translates into dark humor there, but in Eastern and Central Europe, dark humor is often a way of coping with oppression.
Divya, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I apologize if my what I'm saying does not have that specific of a intersectional lens, but like I'm new into films. But like what Monish is saying, that when you compare the structure to what the Indian politics is going towards, it and the way what you guys were just talking about, that Mariana, she was shocked at the public's, cheering the violence that the Romanians did. So I think that this is just a given thing, but I felt like I should say it out loud, that any political structure or polity which is like, trying to govern a state, a nation, it goes into the roots of the society that is present in the nation. And so the violence that is happening in the nation, that becomes so the media and the newspapers and everything, they desensitize the entire public, and thus I feel that there's this entire weird transformation of public opinion, where they're made to believe that the violence that was done by the political structure of that particular country was justifiable. So if we see, then can we trace this to a structure back, like, because if we say that the public is desensitized to any massacre or any genocide that is happening, then what is the reason? Because like in India, when we see that in Gujarat, there have not just in Gujarat, there have been multiple Muslim genocides. But like even today, when we even if you talk to some kids in Gujarat, I've seen in my personal families, people pass on that hatred to their children, and their children don't get a chance to question it. So this desensitization, what structure does that come from? And it's not just desensitization, it accelerates as it's like it's not like the public does not care if the violence is happening, the public is cheering for it. So where can you trace that? Is there any philosophical system that might justify that thing? Does it make sense what I'm saying? I'm so sorry. It's like really inarticulate.
I'm trying to think if I can have a general enough answer for your question. I mean, I think that cheering in the case in this movie was not so much for the burning of that structure where there were people inside. It was for the when the armies walk on, right? And you have the Romanian army, okay, so they're cheering for that. And then you have the Soviet army, and they're jeering at the Soviet army. And then you have the swastika and the Nazis, and then they're cheering for them. But it's not when they're actually burning. Are they? I don't think there's cheering there. And
I might
I'm
have
making it more specific.
Yeah, right.
What you asked.
Okay.
But I think those symbols mean something. The Soviets those are the bad guys, because from 1947 till 1989, we were part of the Soviet bloc, and we know that was bad. They're not thinking about the Soviets beat the Nazis during the war. And that's the problem, because they're not open to learning that lesson, which was not a lesson that was really taught at all for too long. And so it's a very hard lesson to teach after ignorance and manipulation. Now, if maybe you can help me by tailoring that to the Gujarat situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that like the title of the film, it says that I don't care if we go down in history as barbarians. So is that an undertone to saying that the culture that we have put a beginning to, it's like it's really
Well,
weird to
that,
say
you
it
know
out.
that Divyan, am I saying that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. You know, that's a quote from Mihai Antonescu
Yeah,
from,
yeah.
from during
From
the
a speech.
war.
Yeah.
And he's saying that, look, this is an opportunity for us. We can ethnically cleanse Romania at this moment. Let's get rid of the Jews. Let's burn them. Let's hang them. So at that time, that was he was fine with that, and so were, you know, what they did in Odessa, they felt was justified, and it was the ideology, and it was racist, and it was violent and horrible.
Right. Okay.
I think Sachin had also raised his hand. Sachin?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Irina, for the talk and others for their insights. Ma'am, may I put my question in the chat box?
I'm sorry?
May I field my question in the chat box? Is that okay? Because
Sure.
thank you. Yeah.
Do we have a chat box? Yes, I guess so.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, can I enter?
Yes, please do.
See, the previous discussion about Divyan. See, whatever you are giving us Gujarat example, I do not think it will fit to this Romania or German the exposition, because the Germans and the East Europeans, in their history, they even in their history books, they reported about the what is it called, atrocities they committed during the Jewish atrocities on Jewish and World War crimes, everything, so that they people will understand how oppressive it is. It is not to teach them or enjoy or some jubilate. Rather, it is to make them how atrocious they are, and they actually made it as syllabus also. So I think that way Romanians also doing the similar way through political modernism. So we have to see in that way, not to develop a kind of a vengeance or a generational transmission of that vengeance. Here they are undoing it, actually. They are trying to undo it. Whatever the crimes were happened, by reporting it, this generation is understanding how cause of it, actually. In that way, their histories are really way ahead of Indian, whatever we learn in history. I treat it like that. We have to
So I understand what you're saying, and that's totally appropriate. The only measure that the only thing reason I compared was just to talk about the desensitization that any genocidal activity will lead to the culture that comes ahead, nothing else. Like I know that it's two different geographical lenses with different intersectionalities. I'm totally aware of that. I just wanted to talk about the desensitization that it caused in the culture. That's all.
Actually, they are sensitizing their population. Actually, they are sensitizing. It is not. It's not in a negative tone.
No, it is that the play itself is an attempt to sensitize. But see the reaction of the people at the end. And why it is a success, though I mean, Movila and everybody were worried that showing a lot of things would be problematic. But see, the clapping and the maximum response and the fun from the audience comes when the Nazis come in. when the Romanian nationalist songs are happening and when the speech is happening, if you look at the audience reactions, the audience is happy and clapping when they say we don't. I don't care if you go down in history as the Barbarians.
Right.
The attempt is definitely by the theater director who's making a very serious attempt to address the issue. But the audience is insensitive, desensitized. That is what Divyang was trying to say. They are not willing to look beyond the Soviet period and their own cultural and nationalistic history, which is bloody. Look at what Movila says. Why are you bothered about this thing? What happened in there? There were bigger massacres there. There were 25 million people killed in the Ming dynasty, and this war already going on. Everybody is trying to not. The whole entire system is still not comfortable with the truth she's trying to present in the screen. The attempt definitely is by the director, but the response is of the mass and all to the thing, it falls flat. The problem doesn't happen because the audience claps and it becomes a very good show. Audience is not reacting to the brutality that is shown on the screen. I mean, portrayed in that reenactment. Thank you.
So I think, Geeta, shall we take the chat question?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to read it aloud, Irina, or have you?
Oh my God, it's a very long question.
Yes.
Yes.
Should I read it aloud?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is from Sachin. He says, hello, everyone. Good to be here. I think this film sits right on top of the list of all the films about making a film on visual art, in this case, theater. The first half an hour felt very close to Day for Night, but what makes it different is its political commitment. I found it curious that her boyfriend is non-committal about their relationship, as well as her politics. Also, there are about 3 men who have ideological clashes and won't commit to her show, and the government agent who wouldn't let her do the show unless she makes compromises. I thought it was very well done in terms of showing the opposition to a truth-seeking or showing venture, also making it evident the male resistance to these efforts. Now he has questions. Why do you think the director chose the reenactment form? Is it prevalent in Romania? 1 minute. Yeah. Is it used by critiques of the state? The museum seems to be very cooperative towards the production. I was wondering if it was always like that. Thank you very much.
So these are wonderful comments and questions. And as for the comments, I thought also it was very interesting that Mariana was involved intimately with a man who was really not on her level, right? He did not understand the issues that she was concerned about, and then yes, Movila, the city hall guy who had the money. I think, in part he was a bureaucrat. He had certain, I think it wasn't his idea to try to censor everything, but he was doing his job, which was like, let's make this a nice show. Let's make it entertaining. Let's not make it anything difficult. Why challenge people, etc. And then, he's bringing up various massacres from history. But but this intimate relationship, and then the issue of her pregnancy and whether she would have to abort the baby is also very interesting. Why is that there at all? And I think that's something we might want to discuss. About the reenactment, I don't know if that is common in Romania. I plan to go there in a couple of months, and I'm going to find out. But I think that the idea of using a reenactment rather than, let's say, a play or a film is fascinating because it involves the public in a very public way, right? And it also involves non-professional actors. It's a lot more, there are a lot more elements that are uncontrollable or kind of difficult to totally control. You have it in a public square in the middle of Bucharest. You know, you have Chinese tourists walking by and wanting to photograph themselves with with the tank and so on. And it gives it. I like the idea of the reenactment, particularly because it gives the director a chance to pursue the ideology of these non-professional actors. You know, the serendipity of these people who, just like the audience, have their own reactions. I mean, the actors, the non-professional actors and the audience become very close. You know, there's not the gulf between the stage and the audience. But I'm not sure if I've answered your question, all of your questions, Sachin, Dev. Maybe somebody else wants to step into the conversation as well.
Geeta, can I?
Yeah, please come.
Thanks, Irina, for doing this, curating this festival for talking films online, and what a beginning this has been. Such a lovely film to begin the entire discussion. So I was also thinking of this film in terms of its subject. In some ways, it is military action, which is and I was thinking, and Geeta is really, I mean, she's researched extensively on in this area, and to me, that it could come under scrutiny no matter years later. You know, the actions of the military, whatever be the historical circumstances, within a changed nationalist discourse, that you could actually bring it under scrutiny itself was very fascinating to me. So maybe the context, I mean, it says something about the Romanian historical context and the way in which history is alive, something that you've not confined to the past, but something that is very much alive and present. And that also came across in the course of the various discussions that happened. I mean, the process is fascinating. I mean, the process of, you know, the rehearsals, the readings that happen, and as they are watching footage, the kind of comments that, you know, people make, everything, selection of costumes, and the entire process through which this history is virtually, so it's not just the reenactment is not just what happens in the end, but it's also in the way it gets reenacted in the process. I thought that was wonderfully, well done. And also, I mean, I was thinking of this so-called censorship agent. The official, the city official who comes and who's trying to direct her, tell her what is possible, and compromise. I thought even that is done in a very civil way. I mean, even if it is a hand that bears down, even if it's a censoring hand, that there is a willingness to debate issues, and it doesn't end with I mean, though it sounds like threats, but she's good to give it back. She's read, she knows her facts, and that there is an actual conversation. I thought again that was extremely well done. So these were some of the things that really fascinated me about this film. Thanks again, and thanks for filling us in on so many details. We knew very little, and whatever I knew, I was trying to read up a little bit in the last minute to kind of try and contextualize this film. But you helped us, in making sense of what we were seeing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Just one more thing that you reminded me of, Nikhila. One little part of a movie that she's watching on television, right, is The Mirror, which is a movie made very few years after 1989 by Sergiu Nicolaescu, who was a movie maker of historical pageants during the communist era. And then he makes this movie about Ion Antonescu and what a hero he was, right? And then her comment on him is, can you imagine such a movie about Hitler being made in Germany now? I mean, she's, so this is what she's telling the audience. This is what we are doing in Romania. I mean, we are, this is not what Jude is doing, but this is what was done a few years ago. Yeah. So it's also a commentary on the history of filmmaking in Romania and the history of political filmmaking.
Also, I thought the idea of structuring the narrative in the form of a reenactment, is interesting because a reenactment. So there are layers in the film, just as there are layers of truth. There is no absolute truth as such. I think that's also what the film is trying to say. So when you look at it that way, there is a perfect dovetailing of form and content. The form of the reenactment fits very comfortably with the theme about the layered nature of truth. There is a constant reference to October 1941. So that is a date that is very conspicuous in the narrative. And what is being shown is a reenactment of that, of that event. And and the entire reenactment is being shot as a movie. The final product is the movie made by Jude. So there are these multiple layers which I thought also very interesting as far as the structure of the narrative, the way the narrative is structured.
Right. So one last thing, I don't remember if we discussed this when we saw that other movie by Jude, but Jude has been attacked a lot in Romania by nationalists, of course, because he makes these kinds of movies. And he was asked, you know, why do you keep making these kinds of movies? Aren't you Romanian? And when I met him at first at this Institute for the History of Romanian Jews, he said what he tells people is, you know, my name is Jude, which if you say it in German is Jude, and the pronunciation of his name in German would be Jude, and in German the word Jude means Jew. so he also makes a joke out of that, but as far as anybody knows, he's not Jewish. And I think that I take great pleasure in the fact that people like him and his historical consultant, Adrian Cioflâncă, who is the director of this Institute for the History of Romanian Jews, are not Jews. You know, they are just people who are competent on this material. And anyway, that's a last little bit of anecdotal knowledge. Thank you again. Gita, I cannot hear you.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to step in at this point? Sanjay, Sarkeshwar, anyone? Any comments, any questions? Yeah, Sanjay, please go ahead.
As you rightly pointed out in the beginning of your presentation about the self-reflexivity in this film, that so obviously, since we have been talking about the things involved in the direction of a film, or when actors are doing some particular role. So for example, some people come that they can't act with the Romas and they have problem. And then again saying that, okay, I also have one gypsy friend, claiming all kinds of things. So we have the representation of the acting, the representation of the direction, and so it's, and also censorship, that how when we are making a film or when we are trying to stage a play or trying to represent the enactment, then what kind of censorship we face. So along with all these things, then one part is also of the audience, then those who are watching, like we are watching this film, okay? So we are also implicated that way. So it's quite normal to like, you know, these audience which are there in the film, which we are watching, and they are watching that reenactment. So in a certain way, they are representing us, that how we react when we watch a representation or we watch a reenactment or a staging of a play or a film. So their own problems. So for example, like among the audience, there are certain people, it's not like all of them are clapping at every point whenever they see atrocities or when the military is marching. So it's like the militarization of the society. That's one issue. That in a certain way, there are people, and we all of us are indoctrinated to, like, you know, we have so much of fascination with militarization. Military is marching. Okay, military must intervene here. You know, all kinds of debates are there. So as if, like, you know, there's too much of glorification of the military. So that is questioned, and it can be shown only through the reaction of the audience. So it's not that everyone, and as you rightly pointed out, that when this there is fire, then it's not that people are, you know, clapping and they are enjoying. It's not that. But then the camera is focusing on the reaction of the mayor and the people, you know, how they are reacting. So at that time, even mayor and all of them are very serious. So we have, you know, led this kind of action to which level now they realize, they realize the result of their actions, their prejudices, their atrocities. So because of that, I think audience is also implicated, and it is shown there in the film. And it's very important during the discussion, the director in the film, that is Mariana Marin, she says that, it's very easy to talk about the atrocities committed by the communists, because there we were like victims. But here, in this case of anti-Semitic violence, that we were a guilty party. So when you are guilty, it's very important to have a self-reflection that what you did. Okay, it's easy to blame the communists, okay, what they did against you, but now what you did against Jews, that's also one part which must be discussed. So what happens that in this, the person who comes from the mayor's office and he says that, you see what happened in 1904, that Germans, how they committed the genocide in Namibia, in that it is mentioned as Herero massacre, like that. So that is 1904. So through that, we also come to know that there have been other atrocities also along with this. That's also the smartness of the director to show, the smartness of the, I will say, Jude, to show that this is one example what happened in World War II, but it has happened earlier also. So, and it keeps on happening, and it will keep on happening unless we do some kind of self-reflection that why did it happen? So was there something within us, which prompted us to do such actions, to perpetrate such crimes? So it's like inquiry of your soul. That's what the director is trying to do. Then I thought of also, like, certain writers are mentioned, those who were anti-Semitic, for example, Mircea Eliade and Émile Cioran, they are mentioned along with UNESCO. I was thinking about this play, which is Le Rhinocéros in French, or Rhinoceros, I think, in English. Okay. So where it shows that, how UNESCO was isolated among his friends, because most of his friends had become, or at least they were fascist, or they were, and they had joined the group, which were highly extreme.
Yeah.
So what happens to someone who is thinking sincerely and is not joining the crowd, which is that how that person is isolated, that we have seen in the play of UNESCO in the Rhinoceros, that Béranger is completely isolated, and that is the last line of the play, that he's the only person who hasn't been converted into rhinoceros. The disease is mentioned as rhinoceritis, that all of them, they have become rhinoceros, they are becoming fascist. That's something like, of course it has been discussed already, that is also happening here in India. So that's very matter of concern, actually. So he is the only one, Béranger, who has not become rhinoceros. And the last line of the play is that je ne capitule pas, I do not surrender, means I do not become like them, I will still remain different. So that was something what might have been happening in the mind of UNESCO, because all of them were very good friends of Eugène Ionesco, Eliade, Mircea Eliade, and Émile Cioran, and they were also good philosophers. But how they themselves were, victim of this ideology, fascist ideology, which was a matter of concern during those days. And so many of them, like Martin Heidegger, for example, or Rilke also was so much fascinated. Even the people who are associated with futurist movement, Marinetti, for example, he supported Mussolini. So there were several examples like that, and which have been mentioned here in this play. Another point was that I was just thinking here, maybe it's slightly, maybe it's like a question to you, that the very prolonged reading is the reading of the whole story of Babel. Actually, I just checked it.
Or Pavel, yeah.
Yeah, the story which is called the crossing the river. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the river. Crossing the river, ZBRUCZ. Okay, it's a very I can't pronounce it. It's starting with, so it's the name of a river. Crossing the river Zubrez, something like that. So yeah, so it's the whole story actually. I read the whole story, and the whole story is read out in the film. So I was,
The whole story?
yes, it's just a story.
Was a really short story then?
Almost, because it's a story of hardly 2 pages. It's
Okay.
yeah, when she is in front of laptop.
Right.
She's reading from them. So I checked.
Yeah.
It was the whole story that she has read. And what is the purpose of, like, as you also pointed out, that maybe because film becomes slow. Okay.
Yeah.
Because of that reason. So I was thinking maybe, I don't know, you can answer it in a better way, but I thought, okay, somehow the director is forcing you to read it. Also
to do a little reading.
You read it, okay. You don't have any choice. You're watching this film. Now I'm reading this story out to you.
Yes.
You have to listen to it. Okay. So that's one thing. And one last point is about the subtitle of subtitles. Okay. I noted down because I had the impression whenever I was reading, because obviously I don't know Romanian, but since I know French and some of the words I could guess, so I found that, you know, in general that the dialogues were long.
Yes.
And the subtitles were short. So I had a doubt. I thought about it. I had a doubt. So is it like, are they presenting the whole conversation, or they're giving a summary, or they're giving, you know, in some way that some kind of editing? They're not giving the whole conversation. And then later on, I checked then I found several examples where they have deleted certain things. So for example, she's talking about a historian, and then the last, because I could guess what she said that probably that historian was French or Belgian. And this is not mentioned in the subtitles. Like that, there were other examples. So conversations which were in Romanian, they were longer, and the subtitles were shorter. So what could, sorry. I mean, you can, what could be the reason? Yes.
I did subtitles for a couple of Romanian movies a long time ago. But I remember they trained me, you know, you have only a short space for subtitles. So you have to be clever in knowing to get the gist. So you won't have the room to put in the exact long sentence or two. You have to really, so that's part of the problem. But the other problem, to answer just this question, because you asked several, but just the subtitle question, is that I'm unfortunately or fortunately a Romanian native speaker, so I don't really read the subtitles very much. But next time I see this film, because I love it, so I would see it again, I'm going to pay attention to this. So I wasn't really watching for that.
There is actually a very technical issue involved in writing subtitles. That very technical issue. One is which limits the number of words you can put in. Because, I mean, if you really translate the full thing, the audience may take a longer time for it to read than what is the length of the shot. It may overlap into the next shot. So for various technical reasons, the subtitles cannot reflect the full dialogue, especially if this is so complicated and so long. I mean, even if you want to, you cannot, just because of the nature of film that it is. I mean, as a filmmaker, I can tell you that it will overlap and you can't read the subtitles. It will be too short or too long.
Right.
There's a problem. And talking about self-reflexivity, Jude is a very self-reflexive filmmaker also. Here he breaks the fourth wall in the very beginning. And he says, when this character says, I'm Iona something, I'm doing this role of Marina, this thing, and even Jude is shown sitting and directing the film in the opening shots where the camera goes past, and in the end, last shot, somebody says, Iona, come out of the frame. So he's breaking the cinema, the illusion that is cinema itself. And there are a couple of other points also. In the square is on, the show is, reenactment is on in the main square. You see in the top shots, you will see people, Jude's crew there with the camera and moving around and shooting. And if you see some cuts which are coming in are from the camera we see from the top, which is there in the ground and tracking the. So it's very choreographed, very brushed in, very brushed in.
You see actually Jude himself.
Yeah, in the opening itself, Jude is there.
Yeah.
So he's breaking the fourth wall of cinema, and this is something very, I mean, as you referred to Godard, I find a lot of similarities, this discursive and very subversive element similar to Godard. I mean, and especially the later Godards. I mean, not the early Godards, and these political elements threading in with that. Very, very, I mean, Godard-ish, I would say, a post-Godard. And his use of long takes, I find, is fascinating. I mean, this quasi-documentary style of making a film with no cuts, following with jerky movements and, camera going out focus at certain points. That is kind of, very engaging and trying to a very realistic, quote-unquote, portrayal of what he's trying to do and the society and the people we're talking.
Right.
Apart from using non-actors and very, very interesting part of Jude and the Romanian New Wave as a whole.
Right. So I want to thank you, Monish, very much for those comments. I want to answer a little bit more to Sanjay's many questions. So it's true that Cioran and Eliade, both of them were part of what was called in the 1930s the new generation, not to be confused with the new wave of Romanian cinema. But at that time in the 30s, they were young guys, the best and the brightest intellectuals, etc. And UNESCO was also part of that group. But in the 30s, many of this group became fascists. Not all of them, but many of them did. And Cioran was in Berlin in 1933, and he thought, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And, something like this, if Romania could be fascist, then it could become a great country. And Eliade thought this could be like a spiritual revolution. And, people had different ideas about what fascism was. And then, of course, these people, and actually Cioran, Eliade, and Ionesco, all three of them became diplomats of these wartime governments as sort of cultural attaches of the Antonescu government. And Ionesco also had like a Jewish ancestor, and he was afraid that, he could be found out as a Jew, and he could be deported to Transnistria or something like that. But nobody found out, and so he was given this post in Vichy, France, and Cioran also had a position in Paris, and Eliade was first in London, but the British knew that he was a fascist, and then he lost that position and he went to Portugal. And then during the communist period, they could not be published in Romania. They were persona non grata. And so after the end of the communist government in 1989, they were published like crazy immediately. It's like, oh my God, these were our lost golden era intellectuals that we were not allowed to read for all these decades. And they were published uncritically without even an introduction explaining that they had been fascists. And, you know, it becomes controversial. And there are scenes in the movie in which this is alluded to in that square during the rehearsal. And it's part of the reason why some Romanians think, well, fascism wasn't so bad, you know, Eliade was a fascist, and he's this great historian of religions, right? And Cioran was, you know, the greatest French stylist and great philosopher in Paris for all these years. And so it's confusing, you know, it's a complex history, intellectual history, what have you, and it's being written about, but for masses of Romanians, it's a little too complex to figure out, and it has contributed to some people thinking, well, Antonescu was all right, and you know, it was the Nazis that bear responsibility and not the Romanians, and you know, to simplify this complicated history. So at least that's a little bit of an answer to you, Sanjay.
Any more interventions? Okay. In that case, we will bring this session to a close. Thank you very much, Irina, and thanks to all of you who logged in and participated in the discussion. We meet again next Saturday, same time,
Okay.
to discuss Kozlovsky's Camera Buff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Gita, may I ask if we are assured of having the reenactment?
I will let you know in a few
Okay.
days. I'll give you enough time to change the film.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. It was fascinating to have the discussion. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you, and we look forward to every Saturday with you. The next
Okay.
3 Saturdays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks all very much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.